Welcome to the Policy Shop, weekly conversations with public policy experts where we'll dive into the most important issues affecting all of us here in Illinois. I'm Hillary Gowans. Let's get started. We're less than a week from Election Day. Here to talk about this election season and the fight against Amendment 1 is Maile Smith, staff attorney and director of labor policy at the Illinois Policy Institute. Maile, welcome.
Thank you for having me again.
Oh my gosh, we get to talk all the time lately, and it's been a real treat. And I wanted to get your perspective, big picture. Now, that could be a little bit difficult because you've been in this for over a year. And in the past few months, you've really been doing it all. You've been participating on panels. You've been doing endless media appearances, been writing. And so I guess from your perspective, what are the biggest takeaways from you on this Amendment 1 fight and what the landscape has been like for both sides?
Sure. I think one of the biggest takeaways from me is almost sadness in the way this process works, because I have heard so much frustration from people in how they feel misled and how the amendment on its face doesn't do what it says it will do. And that really comes back to the misleading nature of the language, the misleading nature of some of the proponents' claims. And we've talked about that before in previous policy shops, but proponents are billing this as something that is going to protect workers. So people look at this and they think, wow, that sounds great. But when you dissect the language, it's a legal trick, is what it is. It's a legal trick on the voters where they think they're voting on something that's going to protect workers when it can't. And the frustration that you hear from people about this whole process and how there's confusion on who it can and can't apply to, it's frustrating. And I have started my discussions with people more frequently with, differentiating between this can't apply in the private sector. This helps no private sector workers. And it only applies to the government sector. And when people understand that, and I can provide Supreme Court precedent, we can cite the amendment sponsor in the Senate for saying this doesn't apply to the private sector. When they understand that, they more easily understand, wow, I see how this is going to drive up my taxes, and I'm mad about that.
Well, and it's been really interesting to your point. This is not the first time that we've put out a podcast or a newsletter on this topic, especially recently. So I think something earlier this week or last week, we sent out to people in our audience, and we're getting new readers all the time. We got a message back from a new subscriber who said, I'm so upset. I voted early, and this is the first time I'm learning about what Amendment 1 really means. And I already voted yes. I feel so tricked. And I saw that, and it's really heartbreaking. And that's just one person.
Right. And it doesn't help that the state, for this one amendment alone, didn't send out information about the amendment. By law, they're supposed to send out a pamphlet about what this amendment is, the arguments for it, the arguments against it. But for this one amendment, the lawmakers passed like a little amendment, a little provision that allowed the state to not do that this time. So all people got in the mail was this little postcard with a long link that you had to type in yourself if you wanted to get any information about this. And so I've heard frustration about that too. Like you've said, people haven't heard anything about it. And if they haven't been on our email list or getting that information somewhere, through Facebook, people don't know what it is. And like I said, it's written in a way that is misleading, and people are feeling tricked into voting on it.
And the other comparison that I want to ask you about too is this ballot issue versus the progressive tax ballot issue. You were not the face of that issue. Obviously, you're our staff attorney and our labor expert. That's a budget and tax issue. But you were here and you were working on the policy research side. So the the point that I hear a lot of people on the inside, so like insider reporters or lobbyists or whoever, people who are familiar with this process have remarked how different this ballot fight has been. In 2020 and 2019, you had Ken Griffin and JB Pritzker having a money off kind of, who can throw more money into to either side of the campaign. And this time, the only people doing anything at all, really, it's us helping people understand how Amendment 1 would be sort of this backdoor tax hike. And then you've got these very political insider government union bosses who are using dues money to funnel in, I think, like $14 million to the vote yes side. So I'm curious, as far as you're concerned, how do these two ballot fights stack up, and what's the same and what's noticeably different?
What's the same is that this is a tax hike. Obviously the progressive income tax was about taxes. So while it was about taxes, and so is this, then it was easier for people to understand. It was easier for them to say, okay, this is about taxes. And even if they didn't understand the amendment, I think people have a knee-jerk reaction in Illinois, like, if this is about taxes, I don't want it, I'm going to vote no. But this time around, it's, they were more savvy. And it's almost like the progressive income tax 2.0, where we didn't get it by being upfront with people about this being an amendment that's about taxes. Now we're going to do it in a secretive way. And when I talk with people and I explain to them, like, look, government already costs money. Everybody knows that, right? We know that in Illinois, we're already heavily taxed, second highest property taxes in the nation. So people already understand that this is going to cost money, or that government costs money. And then when you explain that this is adding power to the government unions, it's adding things that they can negotiate over, that is only going to increase the cost of those contracts. It's easier for them to understand, like, oh, I see that. Who pays for that? We pay for that. And so I think that this time around, while both of them were about property tax or about taxes, this time the proponents have been much more savvy and more secretive. And I think part of the reason you don't see as much about it as you did progressive income tax is because the unions want to just slide this through, kind of keep it under the radar. Because once people start digging into it and they Google it and they come up with Illinois policy information, people find out this is not what it looks like. So if they just kind of keep it quiet and let it slide through with this language that looks like it's going to protect people, that really benefits the unions. And I think that's one of the reasons we haven't heard as much about it from people in Illinois all over the state at this point.
So Miley, you made a really good point. You've said that the vote yes for Amendment 1 camp has wanted to keep everything really quiet because the less attention on this amendment, the better. Maybe it just sneaks through. But it's been really interesting to watch how they've maintained that really neutral messaging on their campaign. So they're running TV ads during Sunday Night Football featuring blue collar workers, talking about how this amendment would protect workers' rights. On the other hand, you've got 5 editorial boards that have all come out telling voters to say no. And that's been very telling to watch. We first, I can't remember the exact order, but we have seen the Daily Herald's editorial board come out against this, Crain's Chicago Business, the Chicago Tribune, the Wall Street Journal, Champaign News Gazette. All of these editorial board writers have met with you, read our work, and they've also met with the vote yes side and seen and heard their arguments. And the conclusions were all the same. The one newspaper that did not urge voters to say no was the Chicago Sun-Times, which is really not very surprising. They have a long track record of supporting labor. I love the Sun-Times, but obviously you know what you're getting with the Sun-Times.
Right.
But anyway, that's not very quiet. What has it been like to talk with editorial boards about this issue?
I have found, particularly the ones that you mentioned, when you're discussing this with reporters and you can get into that like deep dive of, look, we have the facts on our side, then they get it. Proponents are sticking to this very generic talking point. It helps workers. That's what they keep going back to. Like, we need to protect workers. This helps workers, but they don't have anything to back that up. And we can show reporters, look, this doesn't apply, cannot apply in the private sector because the Supreme Court has said so. And the sponsor of this amendment said so. And proponents have nothing that they can say to that. When we show reporters, this is going to expand what unions, government unions in Illinois, can demand. And we can point to Chicago Teachers Union to show them, look, they've already tried it. They're going to be successful at doing that if this passes. Then reporters, they understand it. They understand, wow, this is going to expand what they demand. They'll have a permanent right to strike. We already see in Illinois how much power some of these government unions have to get what they want. And it's not a hard jump to see that this is going to increase taxes. And, for better or worse, we've had a number of businesses leaving Illinois this year that newspapers and other people in the media can't ignore. When Caterpillar and Boeing and Citadel and other companies are leaving the state, you can't ignore that. And you can't ignore the fact that doing something that's going to increase taxes is only going to make that worse.
Right. Well, again, we're less than a week out from Election Day. Whatever happens, whatever the outcome, there's going to be a lot of work to do. So Maile, thanks for walking us through this the whole way. And I can't wait to see what happens.
Me too.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Okay.
Listen and subscribe to The Policy Shop wherever you get your podcasts.